All right, so we've got a whole stack of articles here about Liz Cheney and Donald Trump and the fallout from the January 6th investigation. It looks like we're going to be unpacking a pretty politically charged situation in Washington.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to untangle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To kind of set the stage for this deep dive, it looks like a House GOP report is at the heart of this controversy.
You're right. This report, it was spearheaded by Rep. Barry Loudermilk, and it's really what kicked off this whole chain of events. It calls for a criminal investigation into Liz Cheney, the former representative.
Okay.
And, she was a key figure on the January 6th committee.
Mm-hmm.
And it alleges that she tampered with witnesses.
Witness tampering. Wow, that's a pretty serious accusation. What exactly are they saying happened?
Well, the report claims that Cheney worked with Cassidy Hutchinson, who was a pivotal witness against Trump, and that she did this without involving Hutchinson's lawyer.
Okay.
They're basically saying that she likely broke multiple federal laws, and they're urging the FBI to step in and investigate.
And how has Trump responded to this report?
Well, he posted on Truth Social.
Of course he did.
Liz Cheney could be in a lot of trouble based on the evidence obtained by the subcommittee, which states that numerous federal laws were likely broken by Liz Cheney, and these violations should be investigated by the FBI.
That sounds a little ominous, especially considering Trump's history of targeting those that he sees as his enemies.
Yeah. It definitely raises some concerns about potential retaliation, especially since he's been focusing on those who were involved in the January 6th investigations. And this is all happening as he's preparing to return to the White House, which adds another layer of complexity to all of this.
Yeah, for sure. So what is Cheney's side of the story? How is she responding to these accusations?
Cheney's fighting back pretty hard, calling these allegations a malicious and cowardly assault on the truth.
Wow.
And she's stating that any reputable lawyer would see right through this.
Yeah, so it's a very high-stakes political battle, and the stakes seem to be getting even higher.
Absolutely, and it really highlights how deep these partisan divisions are in the U.S., especially related to the January 6th attack.
Right. So let's get into the specifics of this House GOP report. They're claiming that Cheney essentially coached Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony.
Mm-hmm.
How exactly do they back that up?
Well, the report says that Cheney met with Hutchinson and urged her to testify in a very particular way, all without her lawyer knowing.
Really?
They're even going as far as to say that Cheney and Hutchinson tried to get Hutchinson's former lawyer disbarred.
It seems a little extreme.
Yeah, it's a bold move. It's almost like they're trying to silence anyone who challenges their version of the story.
It's a very he said, she said situation.
It is, and the truth is kind of lost somewhere in the middle.
Right.
The report also digs into some of Hutchinson's most explosive claims from those January 6th hearings, like the incident where she testified that Trump lunged at his Secret Service detail because they wouldn't take him to the Capitol.
Right, and of course the report paints a completely different picture of what happened.
Yeah. Exactly. They're saying that those claims are baseless, stating that Trump never attacked his Secret Service detail.
Okay.
They're also saying that Cassidy Hutchinson lied about writing a note for Trump on January 6th.
So both sides are presenting very drastically different accounts. What stands out to you in all of this?
Well, what's really fascinating to me is how both sides are using these accusations to push their own agendas.
Right.
It's not even really about finding the truth anymore. It's about how they can use these stories for political gain.
It feels like both sides are trying to manipulate the situation to their advantage.
Absolutely. And it really makes you question, what are the consequences of this? What happens to the country if this just becomes the normal way of doing things? Could this set a really dangerous precedent? Like, what if future administrations decide to just use the legal system to go after their opponents?
Yeah, it's a scary thought. What would happen to accountability? And how would that impact public trust in our judicial system?
These are all questions we should be asking. And if you're interested in learning more about these types of issues, you can check out more deep dives on the Utica Phoenix YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes.
It's not just about Liz Cheney and Donald Trump. It's really about the integrity of our whole political system.
Exactly. This case just highlights how we're losing trust in our institutions, the media, the government, the legal system. There's this growing feeling that these institutions are just being used as weapons.
Yeah, and in this particular case, both sides are accusing each other of doing exactly that. manipulating the system to benefit themselves.
Right, and it just creates this environment of fear and uncertainty. People are afraid to speak out or to challenge those in power because they're worried about the consequences.
So what can the American people do to ensure we still have a fair and impartial legal system, regardless of political affiliations?
It's definitely complex, but one of the most important things is for us to be active and engaged citizens. We need to hold our leaders accountable regardless of what party they belong to.
So it's about putting the country above partisan interests.
Exactly. And it means being critical of the information we're consuming. We need to fact-check things, try to find different perspectives, and have respectful conversations even with those who have different views.
So being informed and engaged citizens is crucial to protecting the future of our democracy. But for now, let's dive a little deeper into Liz Cheney's background. She's the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, a very prominent conservative figure. What do you think led her to take such a strong stance against Trump?
I think it's clear that Cheney feels a deep sense of duty to the Constitution and the rule of law.
Yeah, she sees Trump's actions as a direct threat to those very principles, and she seems willing to risk her career and her reputation to defend them.
She sees this as a fight for the soul of the Republican Party, which she thinks has lost its way.
And that commitment to truth and accountability, I mean, it's really remarkable, especially in this current political climate. It makes you wonder, though, what are the potential risks and rewards of this strategy for her?
Well, she's already faced some significant backlash from within her own party. She lost her re-election bid in Wyoming in 2022, partly because of her work on the January 6th committee.
That's a high-stakes gamble, but she seems determined to see it through.
Yeah, and I think her willingness to speak truth to power has inspired a lot of other people to do the same.
It's like she's become this symbol of resistance against what many people see as Trump's authoritarian tendencies.
Yeah.
But speaking of Trump, let's talk about the potential ramifications of his return to the White House. If he actually follows through on these threats to retaliate against Cheney and others who were involved in the January 6th investigation, what could that mean for our legal system and the very concept of justice?
That's a very chilling prospect. If a president can use the power of their office to target political opponents, it really undermines the whole foundation of our democracy.
Right. It creates this chilling effect on free speech.
Yeah.
Where people are afraid to speak out against wrongdoing because they fear they'll be punished.
Exactly. And it erodes public trust in the judicial system, which should be impartial and fair, not used for political vendettas.
It's like a slippery slope toward a system where power just trumps justice.
It is. And that's why it's so important for us to speak out against this kind of behavior. We have to hold our leaders accountable and demand a system of justice that's applied equally to everyone, regardless of their political party.
Absolutely. We, the American people, need to work together to stop this targeting of political opponents and the media by the Trump administration. We need to take back our democracy and ensure that it remains a government of the people, by the people, and for the people.
We cannot let fear and intimidation silence our voices. We have to speak truth to power and demand accountability from those who hold the highest offices in our land.
And that starts with us being informed and engaged citizens. But for now, let's shift gears a bit and look more closely at the specific allegations against Cheney that are outlined in this House GOP report. They seem to be focusing really heavily on her interactions with Cassidy Hutchinson, claiming that she basically coached Hutchinson's testimony.
Yeah, let's take a closer look at that. So they're claiming that that Cheney actually met with Hutchinson without her lawyer even being there and kind of guided her testimony, like even suggesting that she leave out certain details, things that could potentially hurt the story they were trying to build.
It almost sounds like they're accusing Cheney of, manipulating Hutchinson's testimony to fit a predetermined conclusion about Trump's guilt.
Yeah, that's definitely the impression you get from the report. And they even allege that Cheney and Hutchinson tried to get Hutchinson's former lawyer disbarred, which is, if that's true, that's a pretty shocking attempt to try and silence dissenting voices.
Yeah, it really raises questions about, how far they were willing to go to make sure their version of events was the one that prevailed. But how does the report address the actual substance of Hutchinson's claims? Those are some pretty explosive allegations about Trump's behavior on January 6th.
Right. The report basically goes point by point trying to discredit those claims. Like, for example, they challenge her testimony that Trump physically lunged at a Secret Service agent who refused to take him to the Capitol. They're insisting that there's just no evidence to back that up.
So they're basically trying to dismantle the entire foundation of the January 6th committee's case against Trump.
Exactly. They're painting Hutchinson as this unreliable witness, someone whose testimony was basically manipulated by Cheney and the committee just for political purposes. They even question if that note that Hutchinson claimed to have written for Trump on January 6th, they say, like maybe it was fabricated.
So it's basically just a battle of narratives with both sides trying to control the story. I mean, what does this tell us about the state of our political discourse? Like, it seems like truth is so elusive these days.
It's pretty troubling. It's a sign of how divided we are as a country. We're so entrenched in our own little ideological camps that we can't even have reasonable conversations anymore. You can't weigh evidence subjectively or come to like a shared understanding of what even happened.
It's like we're living in parallel universes, each with its own set of facts and interpretations. It makes you wonder if we can even have meaningful political discussions at all.
Yeah.
But let's shift focus back to the potential consequences of all of this. If Trump gets back in power and follows through on these threats to retaliate against those who are involved with the January 6th investigations, what kind of message does that send to the American people?
It would send a very, very chilling message. That the rule of law doesn't matter as much as political power, that if you dare to challenge those in authority, you're going to face consequences. It would erode trust in our institutions even more and further undermine any faith people have left in democracy.
What are the implications for, the future of our legal system if this kind of thing becomes the norm?
I mean, if a president can just use the justice system to go after their political enemies, it sets a very, very dangerous precedent. It could have repercussions for a long time. We could end up with a system where justice is only for the powerful, where accountability is totally selective. It depends on who you're loyal to, not on fairness or impartiality.
So basically, they would be weaponizing the legal system for a political gain, turning it into a tool to silence dissent and hold on to power.
Exactly. It undermines the very foundation of our democracy, which is supposed to be based on the principle of equal justice under the law.
Right. What about the impact on our political discourse? If fear of reprisal becomes the norm, how can we have these open and honest debates about the issues that are important to our nation?
It would stifle dissent and create a climate of fear and intimidation. People wouldn't challenge those in power. Critical voices would be silenced. Anyone who speaks truth to power could face the wrath of the state.
That paints a pretty bleak picture of the future of our democracy.
It does. But we can't give in to despair or just become apathetic. We have to stay vigilant, stay engaged, and be committed to defending the principles that make our democracy work.
So what can we do to kind of counter this trend toward the politicization of justice and the erosion of democratic norms?
Well, it starts with each of us, We need to be informed citizens, and we need to be active in the political process. Hold our leaders accountable, demand transparency, push back against any attempts to undermine the rule of law.
You're saying complacency is not an option?
Absolutely not. The stakes are too high. We're at a crucial point in our nation's history, and the decisions we make now will have an impact for generations to come. We need to be involved in shaping the future that we want.
So it's about more than just voting every few years. It's about being informed, being engaged citizens who are willing to speak out, hold our leaders accountable, and defend the principles of democracy.
Exactly. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It's a participatory process that requires constant vigilance and engagement from all of us.
Right. But for now, let's go back to Liz Cheney's defense against these accusations. I mean, she's been very vocal in denying them, right? She's calling the House GOP report a blatant attempt to discredit her and the work of the January 6th committee.
Yeah. She's arguing that they did a thorough and impartial investigation. They interviewed tons of witnesses, including a lot of Republicans. They reviewed a mountain of evidence.
She's basically saying that their findings are backed up by a lot of evidence, and it's all documented in their 800-page report.
Right. She also points out that the Department of Justice has been conducting its own independent investigation, and they came to similar conclusions about Trump's involvement in what happened on January 6th.
So she's basically saying this House GOP report is nothing more than a politically motivated hit job designed to protect Trump and whitewash his actions.
That's pretty much the gist of her argument, yeah. And she doesn't hold back, She criticizes her Republican colleagues, accusing them of betraying their oath of office and putting loyalty to Trump above their duty to the Constitution.
It's pretty remarkable that she's willing to call out her own party like that, especially given the political risks. It speaks to her conviction that this is a battle worth fighting.
It's a powerful statement. And it's making people talk about the current state of the Republican Party and its allegiance to Trump.
Yeah, it raises questions about whether the party is really committed to truth and accountability. Are they willing to hold their own members accountable, even when it might hurt the party's image or their chances of winning elections?
It's a fascinating dynamic to watch unfold. Cheney's stance has made her a controversial figure within the GOP. It's alienated some people, but it's inspired others. It'll be interesting to see how this internal struggle plays out in the coming months and years.
And how might this conflict within the Republican Party affect the broader political landscape, especially with another presidential election coming up?
That's the big question. Will the Republican Party continue to rally around Trump, or will this division lead to a more fractured political landscape? Will there be different factions fighting for control of the party and its message?
Right. And how might that impact the Democrats' strategy and messaging as they try to hold on to the White House and Congress?
It's a complicated calculation, and the answers to those questions are going to shape American politics for years to come.
It feels like we're entering a period of significant political realignment, with both parties struggling with internal divisions and facing a rapidly changing electorate.
Yeah, and the results of these internal battles will have a huge impact on the future of our democracy.
Now let's turn our attention back to Cassidy Hutchinson. She's become a central figure in all of this. This House GOP report claims she made false statements to the January 6th committee and that she worked with Liz Cheney to make up her testimony.
Those are serious allegations. If they're true, it could undermine the credibility of the entire January 6th committee investigation. It could even have an impact on any legal action that comes from their findings.
But it's important to remember that Hutchinson has strongly denied those allegations. She's standing by her testimony and maintains her innocence.
Yeah, and so far, there's no concrete evidence to support the claims made in that House GOP report. It's basically a he said, she said situation, which makes it really difficult to figure out what's really true.
It's a reminder that we need to be careful about rushing to judgment, especially when it comes to these kinds of politically charged accusations.
Right. We need to let due process play out and avoid jumping to conclusions based on partisan rhetoric or accusations that are politically motivated.
It's about upholding the principles of fairness and impartiality, even when we're dealing with people we might disagree with or whose actions we might find reprehensible.
Yeah, it's about making sure that everyone, no matter their political affiliation or beliefs, has the same rights and protections under the law.
Now let's talk about Donald Trump and what he might face if these allegations against Liz Cheney are proven true.
Well, if Cheney's found guilty of witness tampering, it could have a ripple effect on those investigations that are still going on about Trump's role in the January 6th attack.
Some people are saying that it could hurt the credibility of the January 6th committee's work and potentially weaken any legal case against Trump.
It's a scenario that Trump and his allies are hoping for sure. They've been saying all along that the January 6th committee is a partisan witch hunt, and they'd use anything they could to discredit their findings.
So they could argue that the whole investigation was tainted from the very beginning if one of the key figures is found guilty of misconduct.
Exactly. It would give them a strong argument to challenge the legitimacy of the committee's findings and potentially derail any legal action against Trump.
So the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah.
The outcome of this case could have a huge impact on both Cheney and Trump.
Yeah, and it could even affect the 2024 presidential election and the future of politics for years to come.
It just shows how seemingly isolated events can have a much wider impact, with consequences that reach far beyond the people directly involved.
And it highlights how connected our political and legal systems really are, and how what happens in one area can have consequences in another.
But let's zoom out for a second and think about the bigger picture here. This case, with Cheney and Trump at the center, is just one example of a much larger trend in American politics. We're becoming more and more polarized and divided.
You're right. It's like we're living in two completely separate realities, each with its own set of facts, values, and beliefs.
And it feels like it's getting harder and harder to reconcile those realities. Like we're speaking different languages, and we can't even find common ground or have civil conversations about important issues.
We end up talking past each other, retreating into our own echo chambers, where our existing beliefs are just reinforced, and any opposing views are dismissed as fake news or enemy propaganda.
And this polarization leads to gridlock and dysfunction. It makes it harder and harder to address the challenges facing our nation.
It also fuels cynicism and distrust. It erodes faith in our institutions and weakens the fabric of our democracy.
So the question is, how do we bridge this divide? How do we bring back civility and find common ground in a political landscape that seems to be fracturing more and more every day?
That's the big challenge. It's going to take a real effort from all of us, our leaders, everyday citizens, to start listening to each other, even when we strongly disagree.
We need to have genuine conversations, try to understand different perspectives, and recognize that we might not always have all the answers.
We need to be willing to see the validity of opposing viewpoints, even if we don't agree with them. We need to understand that reasonable people can disagree on complex issues.
So it's about rebuilding trust, fostering empathy, and recognizing that we're all in this together, even when we don't see eye to eye.
Exactly. It's about remembering our shared humanity and understanding that what unites us is much stronger than our differences.
Well said. But let's get back to this House GOP report for a minute. It's a pretty long document, over 100 pages. What are some of the main arguments they're making?
One of their big arguments is that the January 6th committee was formed improperly and didn't have the authority to carry out their investigation. They say it was full of Democrats and Republicans who were against Trump from the get-go.
So they're basically questioning the legitimacy of the committee's work right from the start.
Right. They also claim that the committee picked and chose what evidence to release, only highlighting stuff that made Trump look bad and ignoring anything that might have exonerated him.
So it sounds like they're trying to portray the committee as being on a witch hunt against Trump, instead of conducting a legitimate investigation.
That's definitely the impression they want to give. They're trying to change the whole narrative of January 6th, shift the blame away from Trump and onto his political opponents.
But the report doesn't just focus on the committee's alleged biases, right?
Yeah.
They also talk about the security failures that led to the Capitol breach.
Yeah, they say the Capitol Police and other law enforcement agencies weren't prepared for the violence that day.
They're claiming those security failures were because of incompetence and negligence, not because of anything Trump or his allies did intentionally.
And they even suggest that Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other Democratic leaders are partly to blame for the security lapses.
It's a complicated issue with a lot of different perspectives and interpretations of what happened that day.
And this House GOP report, with its partisan leanings and cherry-picked evidence, is probably just going to make the arguments worse instead of providing clarity or promoting reconciliation.
It feels like we're stuck in this endless cycle of accusations and counter-accusations, with each side more focused on scoring political points than on figuring out the truth.
Yeah, and that's a dangerous situation. It erodes trust in our institutions and makes it harder to address the challenges our nation is facing.
But let's move beyond the partisan fighting for a moment and think about the role of the media in all of this. The media has been criticized by both sides for how they've covered the January 6th attack and what's happened since.
Some say the media has been too quick to condemn Trump and his supporters, while others say they haven't been critical enough.
It's a tough balancing act, especially in such a polarized political environment.
It's crucial that the media stays committed to reporting the facts accurately and fairly, presenting different viewpoints, and avoiding sensationalism or biased reporting.
The media plays a vital role in informing the public and holding those in power accountable. It's a big responsibility that should be taken seriously and handled with integrity.
Now, let's bring this back to the bigger picture. The events of January 6th were a turning point in American history. They showed how fragile our democracy is and how divided our society has become.
They raise fundamental questions about truth, justice, and accountability, questions that we're still wrestling with today as we deal with the fallout from that day.
It was a wake-up call. It showed us that democracy is not something we can take for granted. It's something we need to fight for and protect, constantly guarding against those who want to undermine it for their own benefit.
And that responsibility rests on each and every one of us, no matter our political views or beliefs.
We can't be complacent or apathetic. We need to be informed, engaged, and willing to stand up for what we believe in.
We need to hold our leaders accountable, expect better from them, and work together to create a fairer and more just society for everyone.
That's a big task, but it's one we have to try to achieve if we want to protect our democracy for future generations.
Now, let's take a quick step back and think about what Liz Cheney could face legally if these accusations of witness tampering are true.
Well, if she's found guilty, she could face fines, imprisonment, or even disbarment.
Wow, that's a steep price to pay.
It is. But it's important to remember that she's innocent until proven guilty and should have a fair trial.
Absolutely. And it's also worth mentioning that the Department of Justice hasn't said whether they'll investigate Cheney's actions.
So we'll have to wait and see what happens.
But let's not forget the bigger theme of accountability running through all of this. Throughout this deep dive, we've seen these accusations and counter-accusations, with each side pointing fingers and trying to avoid blame.
It's a classic political game where truth and accountability often get lost in the pursuit of partisan goals.
It raises a big question. How do we ensure accountability in a system that seems designed to protect those in power?
That's the challenge we face. We need to find ways to hold our leaders accountable, regardless of their political party.
We need a system where no one is above the law and where justice is truly blind. A system where accountability is fair and consistent, regardless of political party, social status, or wealth.
And that requires us, the citizens, to be vigilant and demand better from our elected officials. We can't just sit back and watch. We have to actively participate in shaping our democracy.
Well said. And on that note, let's take a quick pause. When we come back, we'll wrap up this deep dive with some final thoughts on the state of American democracy and what we can do to strengthen it in the face of these challenges. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we took that break, we were talking about how important accountability is in our political system and how this whole situation with Cheney and Trump just highlights the challenges we're facing right now.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. I mean, from the details of that House GOP report to what it all means for American democracy as a whole. It's really been a journey, hasn't it? Through all this political maneuvering and legal battles and all these ethical dilemmas.
It really has. And as we wrap things up here, I think it's good to take a step back and just think about what we've learned.
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that truth can get lost in the middle of all this political fighting.
Yeah.
It's so easy for accusations to fly around, and it's really hard to tell what's true and what's not in this crazy news cycle.
It's true, and we're seeing these huge divisions in our society, and those divisions are often exploited and made worse just for political gain.
And we've talked about those fundamental questions about accountability, about justice, about the very foundation of our rule of law.
So as we come to the end of this episode, what are some of the key things you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Well, I think the first thing is that we have to acknowledge how polarized things are politically right now. The lines between right and wrong, true and false, they're so blurry. And it's easy to get caught up in all the emotion and the constant news.
Yeah, and information itself is being used as a weapon, so we have to be very careful about what we read and what we listen to.
We need to be skeptical, question everything, and try to find different points of view so we can get the full picture.
And we have to be aware of our own biases, how we see things based on our own experiences, and be willing to challenge those biases to get a more balanced understanding.
It's about being thoughtful, being engaged, and actively trying to find the truth, realizing that truth is often complicated and has many sides.
Absolutely. And another key takeaway is that accountability is absolutely crucial for a healthy democracy. When those in power aren't held responsible for what they do, it erodes public trust. It weakens the whole system.
We have to demand transparency and integrity from our leaders, no matter what party they belong to.
And we have to support those institutions that are meant to hold power in check, like a free and independent press, an impartial court system, and strong watchdog groups.
And as citizens, we can't be afraid to speak up against injustice, even when it's hard or makes us uncomfortable. Staying silent when bad things are happening only helps those who abuse their power.
Our democracy depends on people being active and involved and being willing to hold those in power to the highest standards.
You're right. And lastly, maybe the most important thing is to remember that we're all in this together. We might have differences and disagreements, but we're all Americans with a shared future and a common set of ideals.
We have to find ways to bridge those divides, to learn how to talk to each other again, and to work together to tackle all the challenges facing our country.
That's not going to be easy. Building bridges takes work, it takes understanding, and it takes a willingness to see things from other people's perspectives. But it's absolutely crucial if we want to heal these divisions that are threatening to tear us apart.
We have to recognize our shared humanity and understand that what unites us is so much bigger than our differences.
Well said. I want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this deep dive. We've explored some tough issues, and I hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
We always encourage you to keep thinking about these issues, to dig deeper into the information, and to talk about these things with people who have different views.
And don't forget, you can find more deep dives on the Utica Phoenix YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our future episodes exploring the critical issues shaping our world.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep.
Thanks for listening.